My name's Annie, and with the help of my group mates Joey and Aaron, I'm going to be showing you how to do problem 14 from section 3.5. The goal of this proof is to prove the angle BYZ and angle CZY are congruent. And the way we're going to do this is by proving that triangle BYD is congruent to triangle CZD, and then by drawing an auxiliary line from E to D, we see that we have two new triangles, and if we can prove that triangle YED and triangle ZED are congruent, we can use these two sets of congruent triangles, congruent angles, and add them together and find that BYZ is congruent to CZY. Now our first step is that we know that YD is congruent with ZD. And then we also know that BD is congruent to CD. And now what we can see here is something that we've learned, that vertical angles are congruent. You see here that there is a pair of vertical angles. We know that they're congruent. And now that we have two sides that we know are congruent to each other, and angles we know are congruent to each other, we can prove that triangles BYD and triangles CZD are congruent with the side angle side in steps 1, 3, and 2. And then, for moving on to our second pair of triangles, we can draw auxiliary line ED, because we know that 2 points determine a segment. And then we know that because of the reflexive property, ED is congruent to ED, so that can be one of our sides. And then we know that point E is the midpoint of YZ. And we know that if a point is the midpoint of a segment, it divides the segment into two congruent segments. So we know that YE is congruent to EZ. And then, since we know already that YD is congruent to ZD, we have three sides. So we can prove that triangle YED is congruent to triangle ZED with three sides in steps 1, 6, and 8. And then since we know that congruent parts of congruent triangles are congruent, we can show that angle BYD is congruent with angle CZD. And then, for the same reason, we can determine that DZE is congruent to DYZ. And then if we use our addition property, we know that if we add two congruent angles to two congruent angles, the sum will be congruent. Sums will be congruent. And that's what we're looking for. So now we've proved that angle BYZ is congruent to angle CZY. Now this proof is a great way to learn how to use congruent triangles parts to find other angles congruent. I hope this proof has helped, and thanks for watching.